Welcome to the Adopt Well podcast, where we discuss helpful topics for anyone touched by adoption. I'm your host, Amy Bagwell, here with my co-host, friend, and fellow adoptive mama, Macy Peralt. Today we're sitting down with Dr. Lucretia Berry. We're so excited to share her with you guys. Lucretia is the co-founder of Brownicity, Many Hues, One Humanity. Brownicity is an agency dedicated to advocacy, education, and support for racial healing and anti-racism. Lucretia is a wife, mama of 3, and a former college professor. She's also a TED talker, a Jesus lover, and an author. Her study guide, What Lies Between Us, is a curriculum designed for beginners to learn about race and racism. It's truly an honor to learn from Lucretia. We hope you enjoy today's episode.
Well, Lucretia, welcome to the show. I'm so excited. I have been wanting to share you with the Adopt Well community for so long, so I'm so thankful that we're finally making it happen. So first off, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and Brownicity?
Well, yes. Hi. Thank you for having me. Thank you for sharing me with everyone. I'm excited to be here. Okay, so yes, Brownicity, like you said, is an agency, and there's a team of us. I started it as an extension of my family, because actually, organically, people would ask us questions. So I'm African American, my husband is white American, and we have multi-ethnic 3 little girls. And I know we would get a lot of questions from other multi-ethnic families by marriage and birth like ours, or by adoption like yours.
Yeah.
And we'd have really great conversations, and people would say to us, you talk about race and ethnicity in this very positive way, in this very life-giving way. And you know, people would say, we don't feel like heavy or dark or hopeless.
Yeah.
When we've had a conversation with you, and so people say you should do something with that. And you know, this was years ago, probably, I don't know, 10 or so years ago, and I remember thinking, who in the world would want to have these kind of conversations? That's bizarre. And it was suggested that we do a blog, and I was thinking, I don't even know what that is. I don't know what a blog is. So anyway, we just continued to live life. But in our own family, we've been very intentional with giving our children framework and language, so that they and we as a multi-ethnic family can just walk empowered and in our true identity, although we live in a very racialized and racially socialized and racially divided country.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's essentially how I guess Brownicity was born. We started officially in 2015 because people kept pressing, and so I'm like, okay, let's do this officially. And we just started with a Facebook page.
Wow, cool.
And trying to build community of like-minded people, whether you are multi-ethnic or in a multi-ethnic community or in a multi-ethnic family.
Yeah.
And wanted to be able to have the conversations that we needed to have.
Yeah.
And but then when the Charleston massacre happened, people came to us and said, okay, it's time for you to do something in a more official capacity. Can you please teach us? And fortunately, I have a background in education. So my doctorate is in curriculum and instruction. And so true to this, I had always had a little curriculum in my back pocket.
Yeah,
So
I love it.
I thought, I'll pull this out and dust it off
Yeah.
and put it to use. And so that we did our first kind of pilot class, and the people who stuck with the class were the people who then took us, you know, elsewhere into other doors, into other organizations, churches, and now we're even in a school.
Wow, that's
I
cool.
love it.
I didn't realize you were in a school. That's awesome. I've been following along on social media for a while, and you know, obviously really enjoy it. Macy and I are, many of you know, both in multi-ethnic families. We are white mamas to African American babies who joined our family by way of adoption, and we're both Christians as well. And so we know that skin color and race is a conversation that's often swept under the rug in many churches. But now that we're parenting African American children, we've realized that we can't ignore that any longer as a society as a whole. So obviously we're really excited to talk with you about how you believe adoptive families can do transracial adoption really well. So would you mind first, before we get super into that, just explaining the difference between race and ethnicity?
Right. One of the things that I learned right away is that people confused terms and didn't really understand the difference between race, ethnicity, nationality, and culture. And they're all very, very
I mean,
different
myself
things.
included. I've
Yeah.
asked this question to
Oh, for
someone about
sure.
a year ago because I was like, wait a minute, I'm confused. What's what?
Exactly. And so if you don't mind, I'll just read a definition. But first, let me say that race is constructed. So people need to understand that we aren't biologically races. We aren't these 4 or however many categories you were taught of people groups or of species of humans that there are. So race is like essentially before the United States and people in Europe had, well, all over the world anyway, had hierarchies in terms of like kings or nobility, and then you had, poor people and working people, and, so you had your different categories and stations in life. Well, they just essentially brought the same kind of constructs, but instead of making it about royalty or not royalty, they divided us essentially by skin tone. And so race is constructed categories through laws, policies, and practices to suit economic, social, and political agendas. Now, more specific definition and the more popular sociology definition is it's a specious classification of human beings created by Europeans during a period of worldwide colonial expansion, using themselves as the model for humanity for the purpose of assigning and maintaining white skin access to power and privilege. And then that is by Dr. Please excuse me if I mess up this name, Maulana Karinga.
Good job.
Okay.
Wow.
Good job.
Sounds good.
So for example, a person who could be categorized as Black, so in the Black racial category in the United States, might be in the white category in Brazil.
Yeah.
But also could be in the colored category in South Africa.
Wow.
The same person.
Wow.
With the one skin. So it's going to be different.
Just how we view people as a society.
It depends on how that nation decided to put the categories and place the categories and skin tones within those categories. So that's what race is. And so it'll differ wherever you go, or depending on where you go. Now, for ethnicity is socially defined category of people who identify with each other based on common ancestral, social, cultural, or national experience. So ethnicity is more what we have in common, because maybe we have the same ancestors, or we've been living together in the same community. Maybe we have the same recipes, we listen to the same music, the same type of clothing. We have a common understanding of how we perceive the world. So, for example, ethnicities are Italian. Mm-hmm. So even though my husband is in the white racial category, he's like Italian and Native American and German and Scottish.
Too funny.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then
that does make
Jewish,
sense.
Yes, Jewish. Now, at one point in history in the United States, Jewish was not in the white racial category. Right. It was more recently added to the white racial category.
That's interesting.
And so were Italians and Polish people. So white was pretty exclusive at one point in our country, and then over some time, to kind of quell some. I won't get into all that. That's a whole class. But other people were added to the white racial category, and so that's why now even some Latinx people. Some are considered in the white racial category, even though they are Spanish speaking. Wow. You see?
Yes.
And some are not, and they're considered Afro Latinx.
Wow.
And then another ethnicity is like American. So essentially, we are American.
Right.
Ethnically, because of all that we have in common, because we've lived on this continent together, or in this North American space together. So for multi-ethnic families, we need to be able to talk about, like racial categories.
Yeah.
and ethnicities. So like I
Right.
said, like my husband's in the white racial category. I'm in a black racial category. But what about our children?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so that's going to depend on the law of whatever country you're in.
Wow.
So, it, the law here in the United States would say, well, they are black, potentially, but then ethnically, is that fair to them to deny the very German, Scottish, and all those things, the Europeanness part of themselves? Or
Sure.
like you two are in the white racial category,
Right.
and your brown children are in a different racial category.
Yeah.
Right? So what does that say about your family? See, race just doesn't work.
It
Yeah.
doesn't.
Like,
the categories
It
doesn't
doesn't.
Right. And so we are multi-ethnic families. We're not
Yes.
like white and black families, or
Right.
white and we're
We're an American family.
there you go.
Yeah.
We
Yeah,
really
I like
are.
it.
Yeah.
We really are an American family.
I love it. So, when my husband and I first started our adoption process, our home study social worker told me that we really needed to think through saying yes to being open to adopting a child of any ethnicity. And that kind of surprised me at first, because to us it was just like, oh, we don't care.
Right.
It doesn't matter to us. But she showed me that being open to adopting a child of a different color should not just be a flippant decision that's made, and it isn't like a noble thing to do. And she has a multi-ethnic family herself. And so she shared with us some of the complexities that being a multi-ethnic family has held for them. Even things like people thinking that she's not her daughter's real mom, for lack of a better term, because they have completely different skin colors. So when I began making sure that we were well equipped for transracial adoption, one of the first things that I had to confront were my own implicit biases. And that was really painful, and continues to be, because that is a lifelong process for sure, to just trudge up those ugly parts of my heart and to see how I've been so conditioned by our world today. But it's so necessary to do that. So can you explain what implicit biases are and why it's important for us to confront them?
Right. And this is also important for families like mine, too.
Yeah.
Because if you marry a person that's in a different racial category, I mean, you need to equip yourself for how your experience will change, how your
Right.
lived experience will change now, and your children.
Yeah.
Okay. So essentially, implicit bias is the myriad of fears, feelings, perceptions, and stereotypes that lie deep within the subconscious. That's what's important.
Yes.
Subconscious. So memory records that exist without an individual's permission or acknowledgement. So it's not whether we consider ourselves good people
Right.
or not. It is like the long-term conditioning that
Right.
that is shaped in the let's see, what is it? I don't want to say the wrong brain term, so I won't. I'll just skip over that. I won't, because I'm seeing the word, but I don't want to say the wrong word. But what people need to understand, and so here is an acronym of BRAIN. Okay.
Okay.
Biases really are inherently normal.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
so good.
And because of the amount of information that we take in on a daily basis, our brain has created some shortcuts, some schematas, some things,
Right.
that type of thing. So, for example, a long time ago, when you see a lion, you knew danger.
Right.
You didn't
Yeah.
every time have to contemplate
Oh, should I
whether
be
this
afraid?
was a
Yeah.
And so a lot of our that part of the brain is fear driven, but it is for healthy
Sure.
reasons, right?
Right.
But what has happened is, and I'm just going to speak specifically about the United States because that's where we are.
For sure.
Yeah.
So for 400 years, we've told a story about who is safe and who is not.
Yep.
We've done that through a skewed history, so
Yeah.
only telling the history of Europeans and their conquests and colonizations and their contributions to the United States.
Yeah.
And we've left out other very hard-working,
Yeah.
free labor
Yeah.
ethnic
Yeah.
group.
It's so
Yeah,
true.
seriously.
And then through political, not helpful political agendas, we've told horrible stories to so that people in the white racial category fear people in other ethnic groups, even though they are working hard and they're trying to be, good citizens and pursue happiness like everyone else. So we've told this story, the same story over and over. And so then we've just been conditioned. And
Right.
for my students at this high school, we use the term baked in.
Yeah.
So it's just like baked in there. It's
Yeah.
just really baked in there. And so that's why, for example, I love this. One of my white friends said to me, Lucretia, why is it that I have never in my life had a bad experience with an African-American man? But when I'm in my car and I see an African-American man, I lock my door.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, first of all, I love your honesty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. But that is, again, because that's how she's been conditioned. She's been
Right.
conditioned that as a white female, she is safe and probably pure and needs to be protected. This is the
Yeah.
narrative that we've seen in movies and commercials and in
Yeah.
our fairy tale books.
Right.
Disney has helped a lot with that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And then we've been told this story of African American men or black men being dangerous, and you should fear them. And so these are these kind of things that get baked in, and
Yeah.
then the fear part of our brain subconsciously reacts to that. And so that's where, we have stereotypes and
Yeah.
things like that. Now, so if you are adopting, and then, for example, because it's different, like if, as a person of color, as an African American, I'm adopting maybe a biracial child or a child who is white. Okay, that's a different type of work than if you're a white parent who is adopting a child of color, because you probably have not for your whole life had to question these narratives,
Right.
challenge the
Right.
narratives, right? Be exposed to counter narratives and a different story. So like a person of color, my whole life I was exposed to, I received the toxic messaging that, white is the default and the standard. However, I was in a home where conversations about race were very normal and healthy for the purpose of our survival, and healthy growth. So I was given other aspects of history,
Yeah.
and other stories and helpful stories. And of course, I was around amazing African American men. So I
Right.
knew that
They were safe.
they were not dead. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I always had that, always had those opportunities to challenge and to be analytical and critical of kind of the mainstream narratives or the mainstream stories that kind of create that subconscious fear of people of color. But if you are white, you probably have not had those
Right.
opportunities. And then so now you're about to, or you have adopted a child who will then need exactly what I needed as a child. So it's important to do the work. And so even though it's some hard wiring, there are things to do to be able to work on that, and acknowledging it
Yeah.
is the first thing. And people are afraid to do that because what I hear sometimes is like, oh, if you take the implicit association test, so people think, oh, it's telling me that I'm racist, No, that's not what it's doing. It's actually just measuring and telling you that the bias is real. And so even on those
Right.
tests, a lot of people of color or African Americans tend to have a bias toward white people
Yeah.
because we all have been, getting this messaging. But like someone like me, like I said, because I think I was always being presented with a counter narrative and being able to have the skills and the consciousness to challenge, then I'm hardwired a little differently. So whenever I take the test, it says, it pretty much says no bias. And I don't know what that means. I'm like,
I love it.
it's like I'm racist towards everybody. No, I'm just kidding. That's not what it means. That's not what it means. But you see, so we can, it's not, just because, biases are, like, we all have the bias. It's everyone. It's natural. It's necessary. But we can shift how we are hardwired. We can rewire.
Yeah.
It's called neuroplasticity. We can
Yeah.
shift that
Yes.
thinking.
Okay, this is so good and so helpful, and I'm so glad that we're talking about it. But I feel like we can't talk about race without talking about this colorblind movement that we're in. And I know and I believe Macy, you as well, we've talked about this a bit, but we've had well-meaning people tell us that we don't have to worry about skin color, that our love is simply enough for our children. And, I don't feel that way. I obviously do think that my love for her is very important, but I think that we aren't colorblind because as we're sitting here, I can tell that you are more brown than I am. I mean, it's obvious,
Are you
right?
sure?
So,
Are you sure?
and Macy has this beautiful porcelain skin. Anyway, but talk to us a bit about the whole colorblind idea and your thoughts on that.
All right. I think that is the perfect follow-up to the bias because like we said, bias operates automatically without conscious direction.
Right.
So that's why color blindness cannot, like even if
you can't choose it.
Right.
Yeah.
You can't choose it. You can want to be it. And yes, it's noble, but even in that it's still very flawed. So yeah, it sounds good in theory, but pretending we don't see color is not helpful. Like pretending that something isn't there doesn't help you.
Right. It's like closing your eyes if someone breaks into your room.
Yeah.
It's like you can't just close your eyes. They're still there.
Yeah, there's still a thing that we need to address. And so actually the whole colorblind approach or the colorblind ideology, although well-meaning, has actually robbed us, robbed a whole generation. I think our generation of a framework and language and power to to actively address and deconstruct this all of the falseness around race and racism. So we are essentially have been told to be silent about it, and colorblindness also it really serves white people. It doesn't, or people in the white racial category,
right?
Because of course in my home with all Black parents, how in the world is colorblindness helping me be able to thrive in a country with such a history of racism that's, and still quite a lot of racism going on. And so, it serves to make white people comfortable because then it essentially, takes maybe it takes away these opportunities for you to engage in the complex world that we actually live in. That's like saying, well, let's pretend that we're all the same gender.
Right.
Right. And yes, we don't have to get into all the complexities of gender. So also the colorblindness approach, it actually shames people of color because it's saying that the undertone there is that color is bad.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't
talk
about it.
Let's just not look at it.
Yeah. That's not, and so then that doesn't really work for my family, right? Because like you said, like my kids, of course, as babies can see that daddy looks differently than mommy. And it's not just our hair, they know. And then our children, our 3 girls, are 3 different skin tones. So in our family of 5, we are 5 different skin tones. And so if we say, well, let's just be colorblind, that's a lot we can't talk about.
Right. I actually have an interesting story on this. So my daughter, she is about to turn 3, but this was probably 8 months ago. So she's about 2.5. And we had some friends over who were African American, and they were sitting on the couch, and Lee's playing at the table, and we weren't talking about anything to do with race. We were probably talking about dolls. I have no idea. And she just looks up to the lady who has almost the exact same color skin tone as her. And she said, my mommy's not brown, just out of the middle of nowhere. And we had a great conversation about it, but that was so interesting to me to see she's not colorblind.
That's right.
Yeah. And we talk about skin tone and color in our home a good bit, but, at 2, if she's aware of the color of not just her skin, but also my skin and also our friends and our visitors' skin, then I have to be too. Of
course. That's such a great story because it actually it relates to what I was going to say next, is that color blindness, it silences and ignores certain experiences, like whether they be skin tone related or, race related. So in your daughter's situation, if you would have said, shh, we don't talk about, then that just would, like, erased,
right.
And it's so much that is significant for her now, in her life. And at that age, children are sorting and categorizing.
Well, I mean, we're teaching them color. I mean, you know what I mean?
And it's a sign of intelligence, right? When they can put all the red things together and all the blue things together, right?
Yeah.
Or all the animals.
We celebrate it.
That's right.
Yeah,
all the animals with 4 legs, that type thing, right?
Yeah.
Right. So that's a part of their development. And they're doing the same thing, with people. Like my husband's, one of his cousins as a child, she was like, he's from a very multi-ethnic family. And so the little girl was grouping us based on our skin tones, and she was saying, oh, mommy should marry cousin Nate because their skins match, and daddy should marry cousin Lucretia because their skins match. Now the funny thing is that, mommy and cousin Nate are related, so they should not marry.
Right.
But yeah, she was just matching us. And I love watching kids observe the different skin tones in families, because I feel like, they say the funniest things.
They do.
Yeah.
And there's no bias with it for them.
Nope,
it's just a fact of life at this point.
That's right. When they're that little, it's just a fact of life. Now, shortly, they do start observing the larger patterns that race and racism have created in our country.
Yes.
And so then they do need the language for that. But in the beginning, they need the freedom to say, red, yellow, blue, brown, different shades of brown, or light brown, or dark brown.
Yes.
Peach, they need to be able to say that and not just have to put people in racial categories, because logically it doesn't make sense. It's like saying, well, someone that is peach, we're going to put them, they're really red.
Yeah.
So for a child's brain, that is not.
That doesn't work.
Doesn't work.
Right.
Does not make sense.
No.
I wanted to address when adoptive parents are told, well, the love is enough. Well, in Brownicity, we define love as hard work. When we do our classes, and we end our class with this profession and benediction, and we say, may we be people of peace, with voices of hope, doing the hard work of love.
Good.
Love it.
And love is hard work. So love doesn't ignore or sugarcoat.
Right.
Right. And then, and race is no exception. And, I think it's funny how in every other area in our kids' lives, we want them to be prepared. So we educate them, and, we tell our girls, they can be, anything. We don't want them to just be kind of considered a sidekick or whatever in life. But for whatever reason, well, we know, because fear. With race, we go, okay, we don't talk about it, and it'll go away. That doesn't work for It doesn't work for anything. And so love is selfless. So that means if you are going to adopt, then you have to know the cost, the cost of your comfort, your safety, and your identity. So love is hard. Love isn't just like, well, let me hug you and all your problems are going to go away, or let me be your friend for family and you won't have any problems. No, that means the adoptive parents will do the hard work of love.
That's really great.
Yeah.
So I love that perspective.
Yeah. And deconstructing that the construct that compartmentalizes your family is important. So if there's this thing that's telling your family, no, you're in this category, racial category, and you're in this racial category. Okay. I think you should be active in taking a role to deconstruct that construct.
Absolutely.
That's hard work. That's love.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yes.
That is such a good way to put it.
Seriously agree.
So Amy and I have talked about this often, and thankfully we have some adoptive parents who are ahead of us on their journey in having multi-ethnic families, and we have access to the voice of some transracial adoptees, which has really helped us to be able to learn from their experience. But I once heard you talk about how one of your daughters referred to her and her friends as different shades of brown, and I think that's maybe where you got the name for Brownicity.
That's right.
Can you tell us that story, and then could you just give us some practical tips for talking to kids about skin color and all of this stuff?
Oh, yes, this is my favorite.
Oh, yay.
Good. Let's go.
Well, okay. So as a multi-ethnic family, we were like, looking for this framework that works for our family. Like, even before we had children, my husband and I, we talked about, well, what are we going to teach? What are we going to say? I mean, down to now are they, do we tell them that they're not white or black, but they are black and white? Like, we were just breaking down the semantics.
Really, yeah.
And words are important to me.
Absolutely.
And the meanings. So there's even certain words that I prefer over others, and I won't get into that because I don't want anyone to feel like. Well,
if you want to, you can.
I know, right?
But so we were very proactive in how what words would help shape their identities.
Yeah.
Right? And so my husband said, well, no, you can't tell them what they're not. We can tell them what they are. So, okay. So when our oldest was, so now she was 4 at the time, she'd gone to school and done this activity it's based on The Colors of Us, a children's book by Karen Katz. And the character, Lena, who is 7, I believe, learns that, humans, her friends, all the people in the neighborhood are hues of brown.
Yeah.
So everyone is a hue of brown or a shade of brown. And then she gets to paint. She mixes her paint colors, red, yellow, black, and white in different proportions to make the hue of brown of skin tone. So she had done that, and she came home and she was telling us about it. And she said, we're all shades of brown, Mommy. And she said, you're dark brown and I'm medium brown and Daddy is light brown. Yeah. And I'm thinking, oh, that's perfect.
You're a genius.
Because that's the perfect, like, unifying, platform to launch from, because it doesn't start with a divided racial category. It says, okay, we are one, all of this part of brown, right? So, and because of my background and my husband's background, and we had already done we've done a lot of like anti-racism work in our past. So we just then extended her understanding of why we're hues of brown. So then that's when we taught her about melanin and how Mommy has more melanin and ancestry. So because Mommy's ancestors lived closer to the equator, and because melanin, what that did to, protect Mommy's ancestors from being baked by the sun. And Daddy has less melanin, and because his ancestors lived further away from the equator and needed more sunlight to be absorbed in the skin. And, children can understand that.
Yeah,
totally.
So that totally makes sense. Okay. And then she would get really specific, as she, got older, maybe going off to kindergarten, she'd say, she wouldn't use racial categories to describe people because actually racial categories are so generic. Right. So she'd say, well, my friend so-and-so has the same skin color like I have, but her hair is black and straight, and she looks like her ancestors are from India.
I love her.
I'm more accurate.
Yes. I love her so much already.
I know.
We need to get her on this podcast.
Seriously. Yes. Yeah. I tell these stories, and then I tell her, well, I'm talking about you, and she, of course, she doesn't remember any of this, and she actually has been a little guide, for me as a parent who needs a fresh and renewed and bold perspective to move forward. And so, yes, you're right. That's where brownicity comes from, because in our house, we would say, as we were describing people, we'd say, well, so-and-so is brown like me, or so-and-so is brown like you, or so-and-so is brown like Daddy, using the word brown for several reasons. And I'll get more into that as well. But then, and then the icity of brownicity is from the word ethnicity, and ethnicity means that which we have in common. Yes. So that's what brownicity is about, like this common humanity.
Love it so much. I am in.
It's so good.
Thank you. And so now a lot of people aren't ready to start the conversation where you have decentered whiteness. So people want white to remain in the center and everybody else to be on the margins. But brownicity actually decenters that. It decenters the race construct as solely the identifier of who we are, right? Or how we look. So I love our framework because, yes, it decenters whiteness. It allows for a more complex conversation that multi-ethnic people, multi-ethnic families, and a multi-ethnic community can have. You can talk about skin tone talk, because when kids are talking, especially smaller kids, they're not needing necessarily to talk about complex racial constructs. Sometimes they just want to talk about somebody's skin tone, like someone's skin is darker brown or lighter brown than theirs is. Just super simple, easy. And let's see. Oh, and it also lets us, as our family, it lets us hold this tension of, okay, still needing to address racial categories,
right?
Because that is still a reality
Right.
that we live in,
Right.
but also still have conversations where we can see ourselves outside of racial categories or beyond racial categories or before and after racial categories. So Brownicity provides that framework to hold that tension, because people do say, well, okay, if we're not these racial categories, then we shouldn't be using them. Okay, but for measurement purposes, right now, where we are in history, we still have to use
right.
the racial categories. But in our home, we're free to move about as we like.
Yeah,
So
there you go.
true.
There you go.
Yeah, so it allows for healthy conversations. And I mentioned one book for parents, and my other favorite book is All the Colors We Are. And I was excited to find that book because that book pretty much does what we did for our daughter and explains that melanin, like what it is, how it functions, and it talks about melanin and your ancestors and the sun. And so I love to go read that book to the little kiddies at the school where I am. And my favorite part is when I say, okay, so how do we get our skin? Because I test them and they say, they'll say, well, from the sun. And then they'll say, from our ancestors. And I'm like, what's an ancestor? Our grandparents that lived long time. And then they'll say, a lot of times they can't remember the word melanin, and they'll say, it's like from lemonade.
Lemonade.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, it's so cute. But
Close.
of course, having my own children at the school, I kind of, they're my little guinea pigs. And so my daughter, my youngest daughter, who did kindergarten first with the same teacher, her teacher, reported back to me how sophisticated their skin tone conversations had gotten from kindergarten to first grade, and how comfortable it was. And she wasn't having to monitor any type of unhealthy talk about skin tone. So that was really exciting.
Some of my friends' children who are white, they don't have a lot of people of color in their community. And I think that it's been really cool for us to have these conversations and for some of that to begin to change, which has been really cool. But I've gotten multiple questions from multiple people who are all white on how and when did they begin talking to their kids about race, because they're not asking any questions. I would just love to know your thoughts on that.
Okay. So they're not asking any questions because you have not given them language. Not you, but your friends, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So how it's they're kind of in a racism vortex or void. So they don't have language. Now what they will do then, because you're not talking about it. So as a parent, a white parent, you're not talking about it at home. You're not talking about it with your friends. And of course, they're learning from all the modeling that you're doing.
Right.
So then when they go to school and there's maybe, a person of color in their classroom, then that's where the conversations start.
Right.
And they usually don't go very well.
Right.
Because the kids with white parents are not being equipped. So everyone should start talking about skin tone that immediately, like when you're teaching
Colors.
Yeah.
Right. It's just make it natural. And I think excuse me if I get this wrong. I meant to look it up before I came and I forgot. I think it's Brazil or somewhere in South America where there's 28 words for the different skin tones,
Wow.
different shades of brown.
I could definitely see that being true in
Right.
Brazil. It's such a melting pot.
Right, but so it's United States, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But we have just not, our language has not reflected, our language has never really reflected the
Yeah.
multi-ethnicity of our country,
Sure.
So
from the very
true.
beginning, right? So sometimes people get a little upset because they were like, well, we shouldn't, like based on the colors of us, we shouldn't be calling our skin tones different foods and things like that. But that's what we have right now.
Yeah.
Right.
And it actually is, a step in the direction, as long as it's healthy, as long as it's life-giving. White parents need to be having conversations as, right away, just like everyone else. And it doesn't have to be a daunting conversation, just
Sure.
like you teach red, yellow, teaching about skin tones and melanin. Now, I don't think, when we've talked about skin tone, it's never, ever been a daunting or heavy conversation. Now, when we've had to talk about racism and history,
Right.
that's been a little different, a little heavy, but I mean, it's just history.
Right.
So did
That's
I answer
great.
your question?
You really did. And I think
Okay.
that's going to be helpful for so many people. And I mean, I would also love to include here, if you are white and you're listening, like myself, even though I'm technically Native American and European,
I totally see that.
but, society calls me white. It's okay to address these implicit biases. It doesn't mean that you're a racist if you have implicit biases. You touched on that earlier. But I think that that's something that's really hard to come to grips with
Sure.
until you really make yourself. And I think that's something that I kind of thought about after bringing Lee into our family is I would have said with 100% clean conscience, I am not racist. I would not have said, or I wouldn't have even thought about the fact of, am I anti-racism? Am I advocating against it? Am I doing the hard work, asking the hard questions, having hard conversations? No, I was just going about my day-to-day life, right? And I think that's probably very normal, and you shouldn't feel condemned or afraid to address the parts of your brain, not your heart even necessarily,
Right.
but your brain. And that's where the difference comes in.
Right.
That is hard work, like you said, but it's so necessary.
And it's so worth it.
Yeah, it's so worth it.
It's so liberating.
It is rich too.
Yes.
There's friendships that will flow from it and conversations that will be had that are you will be so thankful.
Yes,
that you
all
did
that
it.
Amy said. Yes.
So, Lucretia, one of the biggest things that transracial adoptive families, and it's so funny that it's called transracial
I know.
adoption. It kills me.
Me too. And I'm like,
If you have a
but
better
yeah.
word, feel free to share it.
Multi-ethnic adoption, really.
yeah.
I mean, but it's like that is like the overarching term
Sure.
that's used
Right.
like
Yes.
everywhere.
Right.
So
Yeah.
again, change takes time, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But for the sake of the question, so let's just use my family as an example. I am from Maine. So Maine, like probably 99% of it, that's not an accurate statistic, but whatever, would fall in the white racial category.
Right.
So if I was to adopt a child of color in Maine, they would have no mirrors in their life of people who looked like them. What are your thoughts on families who are open to adopting a child of a different ethnicity, making sure that they have racial mirrors for their child or other people who will look like their child around them? And if they do not have anyone who will look like their child in their family, their church, their school, anywhere, do you think it's important for families to consider, like, this might mean moving, this might mean switching churches?
Okay.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yes, I can. and I mean, I do want to say, I feel, because I'm not an adoptive parent, at least not yet anyway.
Yeah.
I'm not. But my husband is in an adoptive family. Let's see, there's 8 of them, 5
Wow.
adopted.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
What?
Yeah,
Cool.
he isn't, but 5 adopted. Out of the 5, 3 are in the white racial category and 2 are in the African American or black racial category.
Yeah.
Okay, and I don't know. I have just been around a lot of multi-ethnic families, again, by adoption and by marriage and birth. And so I do want to address the language. And you asked me this before, and I forgot to come back around to it. It's that whole notion of like a white family or a black child or child of color being in a white family. So that's problematic in terms of how it's even framed, because if you are in the white racial category, once you have a person in your family, a child who is black or who is not in the white racial category, then guess what? You're no longer white. You're not a white family.
Right.
And that should be a mindset and a language that is normalized, at least in your home. So, your African American child doesn't feel like, well, I'm in this white, context just because I'm an ethnic minority. Well, I'm an ethnic minority in the United States, but still, like, this is my country,
Right.
Right. So then that family, your family, then is a multi-ethnic family. And I feel like, when you are, if you are white and you live in a predominantly white space. So, for example, my husband, Iowa, so very similar to Maine. But I looked at how, like, his family actually, his father actually pioneered a church, or planted a church, but a multi-ethnic church. So intentionally, very intentionally cultivating multi-ethnic community. And I feel like that's an opportunity that white parents or any, and you're in a multi-ethnic family, you have that opportunity to do that. And so the first thing I think you should do is, if you haven't already, you should begin your anti-racism journey.
Yeah.
Whatever that is. I mean, wherever you are, in that. So it could be, for you, that might mean you have to move.
Right.
And it isn't about, it isn't solely about having, people close to your child that looks like them. Like, that'd be awesome. But that might not be a reality for everybody. But it could be changing your mindset.
Yeah.
It could be, outfitting your home differently.
Yeah.
Like, I always thought, if I, let's just say if I adopted a child from Guinea, I don't know, then suddenly our family is American and Guinea. Like, every part of our home, the things that we talk about, what we celebrate,
food,
all of that is going to be inclusive, of all that we are. I think that, like, if you live in, let's just say Maine, since that was the example.
Yeah.
Then you need to pursue education, like racism education, especially specific to your area, and understand, like, why your area is, predominantly white in a country that has been multi-ethnic from its very beginning. But when you even understand that, that helps in how you move forward in your humanity and as you parent. And the more the more we learn, then the more courageous and creative you become. So, for example, the reason why I felt okay kind of creating a framework in our home that was beyond or transcended racial categories is because I knew I knew the history and the context of how racial categories were created and how that didn't serve the unity of our family.
Definitely.
So same, like, is your child, being cultivated by the garden that they've been now, like, transplanted into?
Yes, that's a
does that
great
make sense?
example.
I think you should ask God or ask yourself, like, how can you be the best servant parent for your child? I love this. This happened, and actually, it kind of really kicked off Brownicity officially back in 2015. I had a stranger call me. So she was white mom who had adopted a multi-ethnic child. And she was a little, she wasn't around anybody who could help her understand how to take care of her child's hair. So I guess we had a mutual friend, and the mutual friend said, oh, you should talk to Lucretia. And so she calls me, and she is, like, bawling.
Oh,
it was so beautiful. And she was saying, actually, my friend's name was Amy. She's like, Amy told me I should call you. Now, I thought to myself, would I be desperate enough, loving enough, vulnerable enough to call a stranger
Yeah.
to say, can you help me with my daughter's hair?
I love it.
Because what if I would have said, well, why in the world would you? What if I would have shamed her?
Right.
She would have not done it again, or she would have been.
Well, but I'm saying she didn't know that I wasn't going to, but she did it anyway.
It's worth the risk.
I mean, exactly. It's worth the risk. There it is right there. It's worth the risk. It's worth what it costs. And then she cried, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so beautiful. I'm like, come on over.
Yeah.
Because she wanted to know, like, who does your daughter's hair? Because I think, my daughter's hair is like your daughter's hair, and who does it? And and I said, well, actually, I do. We had just moved here, so I do anyway, but I couldn't recommend. And I'm like, I love talking about hair, y'all. That's another thing.
Yeah,
I do.
Me too.
I was like, we can swap products. And then I was like, my daughters, they have 3 different hair textures. So you just pick the one that's most like your daughter's hair.
Right.
And we will play in her hair. And so she came over, and then I invited some other moms, some multi-ethnic families like mine, and adoptive families. And so we sat around my table and took notes and wrote and combed hair and twisted hair.
I want to come next time.
Yes.
Call me.
And
I'll make the drive.
Right? Yes. And that's what we did. But anyway, again, in that moment, she was saying, how can I be the best servant parent, for my daughter? And so then she had to walk away with enough knowledge and, and enough courage to then tell people in her very, white circle that, okay, washing my child's hair every day so that it's squeaky clean is actually not healthy for her hair. And then she just got, just more confident. And the next, she texted me and she was like, okay, so I was in Target and I was helping a Black mom with some hair products in the hair product aisle.
That is amazing.
And she was like, I was so excited, but the Black mom was looking at me like I was crazy.
That is so
And I'm like,
funny.
yes,
I
take
have
ownership
been
because
there.
yes,
I have been there.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Your child has curly hair.
Yeah.
Your child, yes.
And I've learned how to fix it, and that's
Exactly.
okay.
And that's a lived experience.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you can speak from that. You don't have to, be quiet about that because you're in the white racial category.
Right.
That makes sense. My mother-in-law, she can throw down on some hair like mine.
That's
I love
amazing.
She is. So let's see. I hope I answered your question.
Oh, yeah.
I
Crushed
have here chase after resources, friends, diversity, every aspect of your life. Try to get as much as possible. Try to get close to what your children may experience as much as possible. Again, my children aren't just Black.
Right.
So I have, I get books. I read every time, a multi-ethnic person is on TV. I'm like, zeroed in, listening to their life experiences, because it's different than mine. But I'm trying to get as close as I can to understanding and relating so I can be the best servant parent for my child. And I would just encourage people listening, subscribe to Brownicity.
Yes,
no, seriously.
We're kind of quiet right now because we're building some stuff. We're going to be building a community that people will want to be a part of.
I already
and
do.
Learn and contribute. And I'm so excited. So if you subscribe, then you will be the first to know through newsletter.
Yes, Lucretia, we will definitely link Brownicity stuff in the show notes as well so that people can quickly get to that. But I just personally wanted to thank you for spending time talking to us today. I know I'm only a year and a half into being a multi-ethnic family, and in this past year and a half, I've learned more about, I would say 100 times more about race and ethnicity than I have my entire life. So this is such an important conversation, and I'm just really thankful that you took the time to have it with us. So thanks for being here.
Yes, thank you so much.
You are so welcome.
Well, friends, we're so glad you joined us today. We would be honored if you'd leave us an honest review before you go. You can find us on social media at AdoptWell and check out our website at www.adoptwell.com. As always, you can find more helpful resources right here in the show notes. We look forward to spending more time with you in the future as we all learn together how we can adopt well.